He was a fugitive who became a general who became a saint, and a saint who became a god. In Chinese history, few figures cast a longer shadow than Guan Yu, a man whose real life was already extraordinary and whose legend grew so powerful that emperors across centuries competed to honor his memory. He is worshipped today in temples from Hong Kong to San Francisco, his image placed beside incense in the shops of merchants, police stations, and the homes of ordinary families who have never read a page of historical scholarship in their lives. But who was Guan Yu, really? How did a man born into obscurity in turbulent second-century China rise to become one of the most celebrated figures in all of East Asian civilization? And what does the story of his life, his loyalty, his battlefield brilliance, and ultimately his catastrophic downfall tell us about the world he lived in? This is his story. Guan Yu was born around 160 CE in Hedong Commandery, a region in what is today Shanxi province in northern China. Historical records on his early life are sparse, as is typical for figures of non-aristocratic origin in the Han Dynasty period. What survives in credible historical sources, particularly the Sangguoji, the records of the Three Kingdoms compiled by scholar Chen Shou in the 3rd century, tells us that Guan Yu was not born into privilege, power, or military tradition. He came from common stock, and yet, by his late teens or early 20s, his life was already marked by violence with profound consequences. According to accounts preserved in later annotations to the Sangguoji, Guan Yu killed a local official or powerful man in his home district. The precise circumstances remain unclear to historians, with some sources suggesting he acted to defend a wronged party, others leaving the motivation ambiguous. What is clear is the outcome. Guan Yu became a fugitive. He fled Hedong and spent years moving across northern China, eventually making his way to Hedong Commandery in what is today Hebei province. It was there, sometime around 184 CE, that Guan Yu crossed paths with two men who would define his destiny. The first was Liu Bei, a minor aristocrat of claimed imperial descent who was gathering followers to join the government's campaign against the Yellow Turban Rebellion, a massive peasant uprising that was threatening to tear the Han Dynasty apart. The second was Zhang Fei, a local man of means and fiery temperament. The three men swore brotherhood. Tradition records their oath as taking place in a peach garden, an image that would become iconic in Chinese cultural memory, representing the ideal of loyalty among companions bound not by blood, but by choice. Whether the specific setting of the oath is historical fact or later embellishment, the bond itself was real. Guan Yu would remain committed to Liu Bei until the final days of his life. The decades that followed were defined by chaos. The Han Dynasty, which had governed China for nearly 4 centuries, was collapsing under the weight of court corruption, regional fragmentation, and military insurgency. Power shifted increasingly to warlords, commanders who held armies, controlled territory, and operated with growing independence from the imperial center in Luoyang. Liu Bei was a minor actor in this drama for much of the 180s and 190s CE. He held no great territory, commanded no vast army, and possessed resources far inferior to the great power brokers of the age, men such as Cao Cao in the north, who would eventually control the emperor himself, and the Sun family along the Yangtze River to the south. Liu Bei's strength lay in his political legitimacy as a Han imperial relative, in his reputation for benevolence and personal integrity, and in the exceptional quality of the men who chose to follow him. Guan Yu was central to that quality. Across campaigns in the late 2nd and early 3rd century, he established himself as a commander of rare ability, one who combined personal ferocity in close combat with the capacity to lead men with authority and inspire genuine loyalty. The historical record preserves several episodes that illustrate his military character. During the campaigns of Cao Cao's consolidation of the north, Guan Yu served briefly under Cao Cao's command, following Liu Bei's temporary displacement from his forces, a period that Cao Cao reportedly valued greatly. According to the Songguo Ji, Cao Cao recognized Guan Yu's exceptional ability and attempted to retain his service with gifts and honors. Guan Yu accepted the gifts, but made clear that his loyalty lay with Liu Bei, and as soon as he had intelligence of Liu Bei's whereabouts, he returned. This episode became foundational to Guan Yu's legend, a man offered wealth and advancement who chose fidelity instead. Whether the historical details align perfectly with later elaborations is a matter of scholarly debate, but the core account of his departure from Cao Cao's service appears in credible early sources. By the early 200s CE, Liu Bei's fortunes were improving. Following the Great Southern Campaigns, Liu Bei established a power base in the Jing region, a strategically vital territory along the Middle Yangtze that bordered both Cao Cao's northern domains and the territory controlled by Sun Quan in the southeast. Guan Yu was appointed to govern and defend this critical region. It was a position of enormous strategic weight, and the trust Liu Bei placed in him was total. In 219 CE, events reached their most dramatic pitch. Liu Bei had achieved a major strategic success, securing the strategically rich Hanzhong region against Cao Cao's forces. Emboldened, Liu Bei elevated himself to king of Hanzhong, a bold political declaration that he was now a sovereign power in his own right, not merely a regional administrator under the Han banner. He appointed Guan Yu as his supreme military commander in the Jing region. Guan Yu moved. In what became his most celebrated military campaign, he launched an offensive against Cao Cao's garrison at Fancheng on the Han River. The campaign began with striking success. His forces besieged Fancheng and the nearby city of Xiangyang, and a combination of battlefield maneuver and catastrophic flooding, which inundated Cao Cao's relief army under Commander Yu Jin, led to the capture of Yu Jin himself and the destruction of his force. The scale of this achievement reverberated across the entire Chinese world. Cao Cao, operating from his northern capital, reportedly considered withdrawing his court southward to avoid Guan Yu's strategic pressure. That a single regional commander could generate such anxiety in the most powerful warlord in China spoke to the remarkable momentum of the Fancheng campaign. Guan Yu's reputation at this moment was at its absolute peak. The man who had once fled Hedong as a fugitive was now shaking the foundations of northern China. Historians assess the Fancheng campaign as one of the most effective single-commander offensives of the entire Three Kingdoms period. Yet the very moment of his greatest military triumph was also the beginning of his destruction. To understand what followed, it is necessary to understand the political geometry of the Three Kingdoms world. Liu Bei, Cao Cao, and Sun Quan were not simply three independent powers. They were parties to a shifting, unstable alliance structure, in which Liu Bei and Sun Quan had nominally cooperated to check Cao Cao's power. The Jing region, which Guan Yu governed, sat at the center of this arrangement. Sun Quan's advisors had long argued that the territory was more naturally part of their sphere of influence, and that Liu Bei's continued control of it represented a strategic vulnerability they could not tolerate indefinitely. In the autumn of 219 CE, while Guan Yu's forces were committed to the Fancheng siege in the north, Sun Quan's commander, Lu Meng, executed a carefully planned operation. Moving with remarkable speed and concealment, Lu Meng's forces advanced on Guan Yu's rear positions in the Jing territory. The garrisons Guan Yu had left behind fell with minimal resistance, partly because Lu Meng had taken exceptional care to prevent looting and to treat the civilian population with restraint, which undermined popular resistance to his advance. The territory Guan Yu had spent years building and defending was gone in a matter of weeks. The strategic collapse was total. Guan Yu found himself trapped between Cao Cao's forces pressing from the north and Sun Quan's army now controlling his rear. His men, receiving word that their families and home districts were in Sun Quan's hands, began to desert. The army that had achieved so much at Fancheng dissolved around him as the weeks passed. Guan Yu retreated, seeking to reach Liu Bei's territory in the west. The retreat became increasingly desperate. His escort dwindled. Appeals for support from nearby commanders loyal to Liu Bei went unanswered. Historical debate continues over whether those commanders failed to act out of inability or political calculation. By late 219 CE, Guan Yu was captured in the vicinity of Maicheng. Sun Quan had him executed. He was approximately 60 years old. The death of Guan Yu was a military and personal catastrophe for Liu Bei. Within months, Liu Bei launched a massive retaliatory campaign against Sun Quan, a campaign that would itself end in devastating defeat at the Battle of Yiling and contribute directly to Liu Bei's death in 223 CE. The kingdom of Shu Han, which Liu Bei had built over decades, would survive for another 4 decades before being absorbed by the Jin dynasty in 263 CE. But it never recovered the strategic initiative that the loss of Jing had cost it. In the immediate aftermath of his death, Guan Yu was mourned as a fallen hero and commemorated as a model of martial loyalty. But what happened to his reputation over the centuries that followed was unprecedented in Chinese historical memory. Guan Yu did not fade. He grew. During the Sui and Tang dynasties, centuries after his death, temples dedicated to Guan Yu began appearing across China. The official recognition expanded steadily. By the Song dynasty, the imperial court had begun granting him formal posthumous titles, honors that climbed in prestige across successive reigns. Under the Ming dynasty, he was elevated to the status of a god, receiving the formal title Marquis of Hanshou, loyal and brave. The Qing dynasty pushed his veneration even further, granting him the title of Great Emperor who assists heaven and protects the state, making him not merely a military saint, but a divine guardian of the imperial order itself. This elevation was not purely top-down. Popular devotion to Guan Yu ran deep and wide. He became the patron deity of military men, of sworn brotherhoods, and of merchants, who valued the same loyalty and integrity he embodied in their business dealings. He was adopted into both Buddhist and Taoist ritual frameworks, appearing in temples of both traditions. In Chinese diaspora communities worldwide, Guan Yu's image traveled as one of the most portable expressions of cultural identity, his red-faced visage with long beard becoming among the most recognizable icons in all of East Asian visual culture. The 14th century novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms by Luo Guanzhong transformed the historical Guan Yu into a mythic figure of near superhuman proportions, giving literary immortality to episodes that had their roots in the historical record, but were amplified dramatically for narrative power. In this text, which became one of the most widely read works in Chinese literary history, Guan Yu became the embodiment of righteousness and loyalty made flesh. Historians distinguish carefully between the historical Guan Yu of the Sangguoji and the legendary Guan Yu of popular tradition. The historical man was a formidable commander, a person of notable personal loyalty, and a figure who died in circumstances shaped by political betrayal and strategic miscalculation. The legendary Guan Yu accumulated across 14 centuries the full weight of Chinese cultural ideals around loyalty, martial virtue, and righteous power. Both figures are real, both matter, and the gap between them tells us something important, not just about one man, but about what any civilization chooses to remember, honor, and make sacred from its past. What endures in the story of Guan Yu across more than 18 centuries is not his battlefield success, remarkable as it was, nor is it the details of his political alignment or the specific strategic choices that led to his death. What endures is the question his life forces upon us. What does it mean to be loyal in a world where loyalty carries a cost? Guan Yu chose Liu Bei in an age when flexibility and calculation were the survival tools of ambitious men. He chose fidelity when Cao Cao offered advancement. He maintained his post when the political landscape made that post increasingly dangerous. And ultimately, he paid for that consistency with his life. History is full of survivors. It is not always full of the figures that survivors choose to remember. The fact that generations of Chinese people, merchants and soldiers, emperors and farmers, looked at the story of Guan Yu and decided that this was the life worth honoring, worth deifying, worth building temples for, tells us something profound about what human communities seek in their heroes. They seek someone who chose meaning over safety, someone who, when everything collapsed, did not abandon what they believed in. Guan Yu lost the battle. He won something larger, and the temples still stand. In this video, I used modern AI tools to recreate what Guan Yu, Liu Bei, Zhang Fei, Cao Cao, and the world of the Three Kingdoms actually looked like. These scenes are AI-generated interpretations based on historical records, archaeological evidence, and writings from the period, including the Sangguo Ji, the records of the Three Kingdoms compiled by Chen Shou in the 3rd century CE, and the annotations of Pei Songji. They are designed to help us imagine the atmosphere and realities of that world as closely as possible. Every battle scene, landscape, and historical figure in this video is an artistic interpretation. They are not photographs of history. They are our best attempt to bring it to life. If this kind of history interests you, subscribe and join us for the next episode.